course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9:30 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of May. This is The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So it's a new week and there is a lot going on. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in the UK today on a surprise visit to see someone that he calls his friend, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. But it's not going to be all chit-chat. The Ukrainian president will be asking for more military support funded by your taxes. Are you happy with that?
And the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, she's effectively taking on the Prime Minister with a call to cut legal migration in a major speech later this morning. We'll be discussing that with a senior Tory who might disagree with her.
And working from home benefits the rich much less than those who do less flexible jobs. We're going to be discussing the link between Zoom calls and inequality. Are you still on board with working from home? Plus lots more from your headlines this morning. We've got loads of information to get through. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. But first of all, here is Tamsin Roberts with your news.
Thank you and good morning from the GB News. It's 9:32. The UK is promising to send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine today, ahead of a surprise visit by President Zelenskyy. The Ukrainian president will be checkers the Prime Minister's country retreat for what he's calling substantive negotiations over military aid. It's the latest stop on his European tour for increased support from allies as Kyiv prepares for its counter-offensive against Russian forces. The Prime Minister says it's a crucial moment in Ukraine's resistance. Turkey's presidential election to be heading for a runoff, with the two candidates unlikely to clear the 50% threshold needed to avoid a second round. With almost all of the ballot boxes counted, President Erdogan led with 49% of votes, and his rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, had 44%. If both candidates don't pass the threshold, there'll be a second round on the 28th of May. The Home Secretary will urge the government to stick to its manifesto pledge of reducing overall migration. In a speech at the National Conservatism Conference later, Suella Braverman will argue the UK should train its own workforce of lorry drivers and fruit pickers and be less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That's ahead of official figures released later this month, which are expected to show net migration at a record high of between 650,000 and 1 million people. Kate Winslet won big at the TV BAFTAs last night for her online addiction drama I Am Ruth. The series, which stars her real-life daughter Mia, also took home the award for Best Drama, which the pair accepted on stage together. So Mo Farah won in the documentary category for his film, which revealed he'd been illegally trafficked to the UK as a child. TV, online, DAB plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Very good morning. Welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner, Andrew Pearce. Hope you had a lovely weekend. Now, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is meeting with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today for substantive negotiations. The Ukrainian leader has been visiting other European countries this past week as he continues to gather support for his nation's fight against Russia.
Joining us now in the studio is the political commentator Piers Pottinger. Piers, this is a big moment. Rishi is his friend, but he wants more.
Yes.
And we've already pledged about £8 billion. Money is tight. Is there a danger of fatigue for the British public about the war in Ukraine?
Well, yes, I think there is. But, I mean, he's had a very successful trip over the last few days. In Germany, gave him another, I think, £4 billion. Worth of promises of more missiles and more support. But I do think it's very important that we don't lose faith. And I think most of the British public would like to see Russia beaten.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think it's important we do continue to support him. But I think this meeting and these series of meetings are going to be more about the long-term strategy and how to actually end this war, because at the moment the prospects are that it will continue for some time. And that really would be bad. At the same time, Ben Wallace is trying not to reduce the defence force in this country by as much as many people, particularly the Treasury, of course, want to see. So on the one hand, they want more support, which I believe we should do, but on the other hand, our own forces are shrinking. So it's slightly nervous time.
I think what worries me, Piers, about this is that we seem to have been given up on any sort of diplomatic solution. Now, people, every time I say that, they say, but you're so naive, you can't negotiate with Putin. And there probably is some truth to that. But without some sort of diplomatic route, all we're going to do is just plough billions and billions of Western money to keep this apparently endless war going.
Well, I think that I mean, there's a G7 meeting coming up later this week, and there I think they're going to put pressure on Russia in terms of the pipelines. But yes, I think there's going to be more of an effort, and I'm sure these discussions will focus quite a lot on how they can resolve this war without just simply putting more and more muscle, more and more armoury into it.
You mentioned, Jap, that the G7 meetings in Japan, Rishi Sunak's going to take, he's also going to Iceland. I was quite struck, Piers. Prime ministers often go abroad when they're in political difficulty. Mrs Thatcher was in Paris when she discovered she hadn't got enough votes in that leadership ballot. Gordon Brown was in Washington when there was a huge revolt against him. It can be dangerous to be abroad.
Yes, and I mean, I think from what we've seen over the weekend with the Conservative Democratic Organisation,
the pro-Boris
the very pro-Boris split in the party, me being even more vocal, and given the terrifying manifesto the Labour Party have produced in their policy handbook, this is not a time for disunity in the party, and Rishi needs to become a strong vocal leader, really achieve something. And he doesn't have much time.
Let's bring Darren in. Darren McCaffrey is also with us. Good morning, Darren.
Good
nice
morning.
to see you. Rishi Sunak has to tread a very fine line here, doesn't he? Because when this invasion started from Putin into Ukraine, the West very much got behind it. We welcomed Ukrainians into our home. I think most people are under the illusion this might be something quite quick and it will be over and we would do our bit. How does Rishi Sunak now appease those people who are losing patience with the never-ending chequebook that we seem to be signing?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I mean, his immediate concern will always be what MPs think, and there has not been any substantive move at all in Parliament within the Conservative Party suggesting that in any way the UK should take the foot off the pedal, if you like, in terms of support for Ukraine. In fact, actually, I think one of even its critics within the party, the Boris Johnson supporters in the party, would say that is one of the things that at least has carried on Boris Johnson's absolute sense that Britain is going to be the leader in supporting Ukraine. Out there among the public, I mean, I've not really seen many opinion polls on this, but I don't see a massive shift in public opinion where people feel that, you know, the support should stop any time soon. I think for the UK, they obviously do realise that any deal or any sense of conclusion to this conflict, if it is going to be diplomatic, is not going to be brought by the UK. It's going to have to involve bigger forces, let's be honest about this, whether that be China, whether that be the United States. But in the end, as I say, I think when you look at it politically from the Prime Minister's point of view, this is a very safe pair of hands. When President Zelenskyy tweets this morning, "My friend Rishi," that is something I think that people within the Conservative Party appreciate.
Yeah. The issues he's got politically, though, are cabinet ministers openly contradicting him. Is what we're going to see with the Home Secretary today, Suella Braverman, at another right-wing think tank conference today. She's going to say, you can't slow down on visas, you've got to cut immigration. And we know that the new figures show 700,000.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, they come out next week, the 25th of May. You know, this is very tricky for the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, the Prime Minister has said repeatedly he wants to see migration go down, but let's be honest about these, that the numbers are going to be at record highs, if anything, and that is post-Brexit, you know, where clearly migration was a big issue, if not the defining issue in all of that. You're right, that message today from Suella Braverman is not just to the 1,000 delegates in the hall in central London. It is also going to be aimed very squarely at members of the cabinet, like Jeremy Hunt and like Gillian Keegan, the education secretary, who seem to be suggesting that actually they need more migration to a degree, or that the levels aren't at least very, very high or unstable. I think that was the question was put to Grant Shapps yesterday, who wouldn't go as far as to say that it is uncontrollable. But the problem is, who's going to win this battle? And we have to remember, Rishi Sunak doesn't have a mandate from either party members. In theory, he doesn't really have a mandate from MPs, because obviously the process fell apart at the last minute. And so you are going to have ministers, particularly people like Suella Braverman, who've got very strong views, who are going to be more vocal, and frankly the Prime Minister hasn't really got the ability to rein them in. And so we're going to see this battle play out, and we heard it this morning from John Redwood on the radio as well, you know, who wouldn't necessarily even say that Rishi Sunak should lead the party into the next election. Things are pretty
We're just seeing, Darren, we're just seeing an image
here we are,
of Zelenskyy being warmly embraced by the Prime Minister. I'm very pleased the Prime Minister's not trying to get down and cool with Zelenskyy. Remember, he wore the same sort of clothes as Zelenskyy. It was a car crash. He's in a proper suit. Zelensky's in his usual war fatigues. That's a still shot.
You know what baffles me, though, fellas? I'm sorry, I can't have... Before this invasion, Zelenskyy was widely recognised. Look at all the headlines in the mainstream press as being one of the most corrupt leader in Europe, not as corrupt as Putin. But in terms of our European neighbours, he was considered to be incredibly corrupt. There was a lot of questions about the trustworthiness. And it feels, Piers, as soon as that happened, and it wasn't an overnight invasion, it was rumbling on for 8 years on the eastern border of Ukraine with Russia, suddenly he became a hero overnight. And I still find that a little bit baffling.
Well, I don't think it's that baffling when your country is being invaded and you're at war. You look to your leader to lead, and there's no doubt he's been an incredibly effective leader and garnered huge international support for his country and is quite rightly, in my view, seen as a hero in the country. And I think most people now see him as that. Now, there's so much corruption in politics all over the place. You could just look north of the border in Scotland and ask a few questions.
Yeah. But to what extent do you think this is a proxy war with America versus Russia, with Ukraine in the middle, with Biden just throwing infinite dollars at the situation?
Well, Biden actually, I don't think is totally aware of what the real situation is.
That's diplomatic.
Which I find deeply worrying.
Of course it's worrying. I think the world at the moment is very worrying. And and also in Turkey, the elections look like Erdogan is going to come back and win again.
Yeah,
which
really scary.
I must say, most people were rather hoping his time was up. And if you want to look at some horrific leaders, there's one staring you in the face.
But on Zelenskyy, you've advised Tory leaders, prime ministers. Yes. Zelenskyy must be textbook for you because he's a great communicator.
Fabulous.
And he looks pretty good. Glamorous First Lady.
Yep.
They both stayed in Kiev,
yes,
despite the bombings.
And he knows how to use communications. He makes his points count. And I think it's, you know, if it wasn't for him, I think Russia would probably have walked all over them. I mean,
well,
he has.
If it wasn't for him and his
Putin.
So can I just
relationship with?
Well, I can just 2 points. I mean, President Zelenskyy was elected. I mean, Ukraine's definitely had to deal with decades of corruption. There's little doubt about that. He was elected actually to help try and clean some of this up. That was pretty much his
elected
mandate.
by who?
Well, the Ukrainian people.
Of course.
Yeah, but my point was that was his mandate, if you like. That's why he was the outsider of politics. Second of all, I mean, this is not a proxy war with the United States. I mean, it may well end up being it, but President Putin very much regards Ukraine, the cradle of Russian civilization, as part of his backyard. And as you rightly pointed out, actually, the war actually began in 2013 with the initial invasion. And, you know, the argument, of course, that the Prime Minister and people in Westminster would say is that we've already seen President Putin invade Georgia. We've already said President Putin stamp his authority in the Middle East and Syria. He's now doing so in Ukraine. The question is, you know, would he then stop there? And there are questions about the Baltic states, of course. Again, very much British backyard. We're a member of NATO. They're a member of NATO. So it's one of those things where I think for lots of Western leaders, a line had to be drawn in the sand, and that has very much come with the fulsome support of President Zelenskyy.
But if they'd just all said beforehand they will not join, Ukraine will not join NATO, categorically.
I'm not.
Because originally
I'm not a Russian
all
expert, but I don't think that
Putin was asking for at that stage.
I'm not entirely sure that would have been enough, but we don't know. We will never.
But I think it is important to draw the distinction between.
We're just getting a shot now of Zelenskyy flying in his helicopter. Look, this is again. It appears as the communicator here, brilliantly stage managed. Military helicopter. In he comes. He'll be in his military fatigues, and the Prime Minister waiting to meet him. Is that landing?
This is Chequers, and this is the
I
first.
recognise the wall.
This is the first. You'd be probably on the other side. I've
climbed it once or twice.
Trying to peer over.
As they try and get me out.
So this is the first time that any foreign leaders actually visited Chequers with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. Of course, he's been in the UK before. He was here in February, and I think, as Piers pointed out, he has been in Germany, France, the Vatican, and now the UK on a kind of mini trip. The context of all of this, by the way, is obviously to try and get more arms, which he seems to be succeeding in, not least of all in Germany, that announced €3 billion worth of arms over the weekend. But this is all ahead of a apparent offensive that we're now going to see Ukraine do to try and reclaim back some of the land that Russia's taken.
Can we talk to Piers about the Labour Party? Because some extraordinary stuff in the Sunday papers this weekend.
Yes.
So Starmer wants Britain to become the first country in Europe to give votes to EU citizens living here. Is he trying to get Brexit back, and is he trying to rig the election?
Well, I think this policy handbook, this 96-page Labour policy handbook, contains some terrifying stuff. And if that doesn't unite the Conservative Party, I don't know what will. Because the idea of giving your EU citizens the vote and also reducing the age to 16...
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't have a credit card at 16, but you can vote.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely mind-boggling. And at the same time, making working from home a legal right, as well as banning employers from contacting their staff out of hours. I don't know how any journalists would work like that.
If we'd struggle, Bev, wouldn't we? We'd struggle, Darren.
It's a terrifying manifesto. It also it's not progressive, it's regressive, because it's also doing spiteful socialist stuff of old, like wishing to repeal the Trade Unions Act, stopping and really nailing down fox hunting, which they're obsessed with.
Yeah, who cares?
I mean, it's one of the most. It shows that the Labour Party have learnt nothing from their previous disastrous governments.
And it will play badly in the Red Wall, giving EU citizens the vote.
Of course it will, because that's actually more aimed at the south, where most of the EU citizens are based. And what it means is it would to make London a total Labour stronghold. Almost permanently if they did this. But more than that, I question the constitutional right for the Labour Party to try and do this. They're actually tearing apart the Constitution, the democracy, and what's more, their taxation policies are again, mind-numbingly stupid.
Yeah.
And time after time, when the Labour government's been in power, they've created a hopeless mess which the Conservatives have had to come in and fix. I can see the IMF being called in quite quickly if Starmer was to win the next election.
This would be the biggest change in the voting system since women got the vote in 1928 if we were to give millions of EU citizens. No other EU country does it.
Yeah, I mean, we in this country allow people from the Commonwealth to vote.
Yeah.
So, if you're from Zimbabwe or from...
But we're in the Commonwealth, we're not in the
Jamaica.
EU.
No, this is very true. No, I don't disagree with that. And obviously, Irish people have got the right to permanently reside and vote. In fact,
that's an historic
Parliament, which is an historic thing, obviously linked back to the United Kingdom of old. But what I'm trying to get at is, yes, this, of course, would be a massive, massive change. Now, it would only ever be able to happen with a Labour majority after an election, so it's not going to happen at the next general election, and it could really well be an issue here. I mean, there's always been an argument about the rights of EU citizens that have settled in the UK post-Brexit. We know that there's always been that discussion about whether and how much they should have rights here, given the fact that they moved here while we were inside the EU. But, it is interesting that Labour, when you look at this kind of from the centre ground in terms of trying to see both sides, is that Labour have always been accused, Keir Starmer, of not being radical enough, of not having policies that are distinctive enough. That
I'm just going to check. There they are. They're wandering around the grounds of Chequers. They'll stop for the photo shoot. There we are, the handshake at the doorstep.
In his military fatigues.
Always is. I hope he washes them. Because he's in them a lot.
I just feel played by that outfit. I just
think
feel manipulated.
I think it's clever. He's a war leader. His country is under siege, under bombardment by one of the biggest nuclear power in the world, and little Ukraine is still holding out. What do you think, Piers?
Yeah, it's his trademark, and he's...
Would you advise him to keep it?
Yeah, I mean, he's easily identifiable around the world.
Yeah.
And I'd advise him to keep it while the war continues. And there'll be a very significant and marvellous opportunity for him to wear a suit once it's over.
Very good point, yeah.
I would say, let me put it the other way then. Would
Yeah.
you say that the same about members of the royal family who wear a military uniform?
No, but
But why not?
Because
it's the same
because
essence,
it's
isn't it? It's all about...
it's about style over substance. That's what bothers me. It's about playing a part. Remember, he was an actor.
He's a war leader.
And I understand that, and I think it's
Country
important
under
to draw a distinction between what I think
Yeah.
are a load of corrupt politicians behind a lot of this and the people on the ground whose lives have been lost, ruined and destroyed. I want to draw a distinction between that because my heart goes out to those people. But I want some sort of solution.
Just so we are going to hear from both of them. They're going to do a brief interview in around 40 minutes' time. So we'll hear from
and this is great for Rishi Sunak. Well, it's a distraction from the Home Secretary.
Well, first of all, yes, you're right. It is leading the news today and not necessarily Suella Braverman, which would have been the case a couple of hours ago. And I just say, within the Conservative Party, I do not get any marked sense. I think this, for Rishi Sunak, is, even as I say, for the critics who supported Boris Johnson, this is the legacy that actually they would want to see this man carry on.
I'm just not sure this is a vote winner. I think people are worried about what's happening here. They're worried about not being able to pay their bills. They're worried about the fact their taxes are so high. And these pictures are going to start ringing a little hollow with people soon.
Because I think it's a vote winner.
I do too, because I think most people in this country are 100% behind Zelenskyy, and most people support our support of Zelenskyy.
This is the most serious conflict on European soil since the Second World War.
Yes, and it's vital Putin doesn't win.
Yeah. And look what he's done to our gas supplies and oil.
Yeah, I mean, he's the most dangerous man in the world, probably. There are some others around.
Yeah, probably his successor.
But he's a really very dangerous man, and we've got to stand up to him. We have to.
Yeah. And Labour, Darren, completely four square behind this, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Parliament is united. There is little doubt about that when it comes to this. I mean, Bev could well be right in the sense that there is going to be... This is not going to end. I mean, Ben Wallace said this. It's not going to end this year.
No.
We do not... I mean, it's been going on, in theory, since 2013. So this is a very long conflict. At a certain point, the West may well have to say, we cannot sustain this level of military investment. And there are also going to be concerns about what happens, even if the conflict does end, about the restoration of Ukraine, which is going to cost a hell of a lot of money. And it is also, again, possible that this winter, now we kind of got away with it last winter, the energy prices will spike again. And that will bleed into the general election. The cost of living crisis is the number one voters' concern in this country. We know that. And that has been primarily led to a large degree by the energy crisis in Europe, which has come from this war. So to say that this is not going to be a political issue, even if it's not directly, people may well say, on one hand, I support Britain's support of Ukraine, but on the other hand, feel very uncomfortable about the pressure that's putting on people's finances.
Do we think he's going to commit any more aid today, the Prime Minister?
Yes, almost certainly, yes. In fact, we're getting to the point now where I think it is entirely possible. I mean, Britain was the first country last week to give long-range missiles, 155 miles. Jets, do you remember jets?
The
last time we was here very much were the talking point. Is it possible the UK is inching towards that? We could very well be inching towards nuclear war, and I'm not sure we knew that was what the outcome was.
I don't think that's happening. Just briefly, Chris, the Ukraine, we think, is about to launch a major offensive against the Russians.
Yes, that's right.
That's why.
But I mean, new jets, unfortunately, take time to deliver.
We probably
and they also have
to
train the pilots how to fly them, so that won't be for immediate use. But I think there is a very strong likelihood that there will be more jets supplied.
Well, this is the interesting thing in the line from number 10, Downing Street, when they issued the statement this morning, saying he was here, said during the meeting today, the Prime Minister will discuss the support that Ukraine needs, both in the immediate military equipment and long-term defence.
There we are.
That's
the point, yes.
It's ironic that we're giving all this aid when our own army is at its lowest level since the Crimean War.
It is.
Absolutely, it is. And, I mean, the two big issues for Sunak are simply the cost of living, but number two is immigration.
Yeah.
And on the doorstep, I think any MP, and after the local elections, the local councillors would be telling, hopefully, Central Office, immigration on the doorstep is the big issue. And when David Cameron so nearly lost completely his election, it was because he was too slow to recognise how strongly people feel about immigration in this country.
The Conservatives lost Dover Council in the local elections last year. I'm not surprised because the people of Dover have been failed by these swarms of, not allowed to use that word, the thousands of people crossing the Channel.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is, there's two issues at play here. Clearly, the most immediate one, and the one that's generated headlines a lot over the last year or so, is the small boats crisis.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister has made this front and square one of his 5 pledges. Yeah. He will be judged, and it's not entirely... In fact, you know, you'd sit here right now and say it's not looking great that this idea of, by the way, what is stop the boats? I mean, does that literally mean known at all by the time of the next general election? A little bit fuzzy. But then there is this separate issue that Suella Braverman's talking today, which is legal migration. Yeah. The fact that, you know, people are allowed to move and work and study in this country entirely legally, but it's about the numbers. Yeah. David Cameron had a target, do you remember that?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. We're looking potentially not just at hundreds of thousands, but high hundreds of thousands.
700.
Again, how comfortable will the British public be about that? That's a debate we've not actually had really for the last 5 or 6 years, but it's a debate that very much could be pressing again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right, let us know your thoughts. Thank you both, Piers Pottinger and Darren McCaffrey there. Thank you both. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. We're going to continue to bring you coverage of Zelensky's surprise visit to the UK. We're also going to be speaking to David Davis MP next. This is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So, Zelenskyy has arrived in the UK on a surprise visit to see someone that he calls his friend, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. But it's not going to be all chit-chat. The Ukrainian president is going to be asking for more military support funded by your taxes. Are you happy about that?
And Suella Braverman, she's the Home Secretary. She's taking on the Prime Minister, frankly, with a call to cut legal migration in a major speech later tomorrow. We're about to talk to a Tory MP, a rather senior one, who may disagree with her.
And working from home, it seems, benefits the rich much less than those who do inflexible jobs. We're going to discuss the link between Zoom calls and inequality. Are you still on board with working from home? Email us on all of the above. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address, or tweet us at gbnews. But first of all, here is the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom at 1 minute past 10. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is meeting the Prime Minister today in a surprise visit to the UK. The Ukrainian president is meeting Rishi Sunak at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, for what he's calling substantive negotiations over military aid. The meeting comes as the UK's pledged to send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine. It's the latest stop on the president's European tour to garner increased support from allies as Kyiv prepares for its counter-offensive against Russian forces. The Home Secretary will urge the government to stick to its manifesto pledge of reducing overall migration. In a speech at the National Conservatism Conference later, Suella Braverman will argue the UK should train its own workforce of lorry drivers and fruit pickers and be less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That's ahead of official figures released later this month, which are expected to show net migration at a record high of between 650,000 and 1 million people. Former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg told us the UK needs more automation to be more productive.
By relying on low-skilled migration over the last 30 years, we have seen very low increases in productivity. And part of the reason for that, I wouldn't say the whole reason, but part of the reason for that is we haven't mechanised as we should have done. So fruit picking remains an extremely labour-intensive operation. And not all fruits can be picked mechanically, but some can. And why haven't we been investing in the machinery which can then be operated by higher skilled, better paid people? So it's about increasing productivity so that you can increase wages.
Turkey's presidential election appears to be heading for a runoff, with the two candidates unlikely to clear the 50% threshold needed to avoid a second round. With almost all of the ballot boxes counted, President Erdogan led with 49% of votes, and his rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, had 44%. If both candidates don't pass the threshold, there'll be a second round on the 28th of May. Well, journalist Ali Mustafa told us he thinks Erdogan has no rival.
Inflation, this runaway inflation, 174% unofficially. Earthquake, which has killed more than 50,000 people, destroyed a huge chunk of this country, the size of parts of Britain, some would argue, didn't really matter because it came down to culture wars. And when Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition candidate, made an informal alliance with the HDP, the pro-Kurdish HDP, it became a question of security versus terrorism.
A ballot on industrial action by senior doctors in England opens today. The British Medical Association says talks have been held with the government to try and resolve the long-running pay dispute, but negotiations remain deadlocked. The union claims the average doctor salary has dropped by 35% over the past decade, even before inflation's considered. The Health Department says consultants were given a 4.5% pay rise last year and is urging them to carefully consider the effect of further strikes on patients. The ballot will close at the end of June. Meanwhile, 2 teacher unions have opened new ballots on further strike action. It's after members of the National Association of Head Teachers and the National Education Union rejected the latest pay offer from the government. Voting will close at the end of July, with potential strike action to take place in the autumn term. The Royal College of Nursing has revealed nurses fear being taken to court over the level of care they give to patients. The union says more than 9 in 10 nurses raise concerns that patients may be receiving unsafe care and their privacy and confidentiality is compromised. The RCN says 6 in 10 union members fear they'll be struck off the nursing register due to strikes. The average monthly rent on newly let homes across Britain was £125 higher in April than it was in 2022. That tallies up to an extra £1,500 more each year. According to property agent Hamptons, the average rent paid for newly let homes reached over £1,200 a month last month. That is a new high. Kate Winslet won big at the TV BAFTAs last night for her online addiction drama I Am Ruth. The series, which stars her real-life daughter Mia Threppleton, also took home the award for Best Drama, which the pair accepted on stage together. Sir Mo Farah won in the documentary category for his film, which revealed he'd been illegally trafficked to the UK as a child. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. President Zelenskyy is meeting with Rishi Sunak as we speak at the Prime Minister's country residence, Chequers.
Pretty dramatic stuff. He flew in by helicopter, dressed, of course, in his trademark military fatigues. The Prime Minister hugged the man who's called him his friend. But they're discussing now what the UK may do to support Ukraine in their war with Russia. More arms, which means more taxpayer support for Ukraine.
That's right. Joining us now for the latest on this is MP for Halton Price at Howden, David Davis. Good morning.
Morning.
Nice to see you. We've been debating this so far since 9:30 this morning as to whether this plays well with the voters. Normally, if we support a war, people are on side in this country because this is what we do on the global stage. We are good at this. However, we have massive taxes. We have very little money left to run our services at the moment, and people are feeling it in their pocket. We're going to be fatigued by this, are we not?
Right. Just think of the alternative for a second, the so-called counterfactual. If we don't support him, Putin will win. Will our taxes go up or down in the future? Will we have to spend more money on defence or less?
What happens if Putin loses?
If Putin loses, I suspect Putin will be deposed in Russia. That's the most likely outcome. But all of the futures are very difficult to predict. But what we can't afford, look, Putin had Chechnya, we ignored it. Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, we ignored it. Crimea, we ignored it. Syria, we ignored it. If you let an autocrat go on winning wars, we've done this before in the 1930s. Something eventually goes horribly wrong. And that's what we've got to stop. And Ukraine, thank heavens, has come before we got to
if Ukraine hadn't had support from countries, well, all of Europe, Britain in particular, I suspect the war would already be lost. Victory in Ukraine would have been in a matter of weeks.
It would have been over in months. I mean, they're very fiercely independent people, and they would have fought hard, but it wouldn't have been where it is now.
And then where would he go? One of the Baltic states?
Well, you've got the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, possibles, or pressure, or a whole series of things would have come to play. And he would have had yet another victory under his belt. And the Russian people would think, well, we've got a leader who can win. You don't want that. The West, in fact, the whole world doesn't. I doubt even China wants that, really.
What does victory for Ukraine look like, David?
Well, the answer to that is in President Zelensky's head, I suspect, rather than what we think. I mean, ideally, they'd like to get Donbass and Crimea back. I don't think that's going to happen. They might get some of the Donbass back, but at the very least, it's the borders that existed on the day he sent that tank column towards Kiev. And that's a de minimis position. And if that's happened and that's cost Russia 100,000 lives, it's brutal arithmetic of these things. If it's cost Russia 100,000 lives, that's definitely a loss for Russia. And I wouldn't call it a victory for Ukraine, but at least an acceptable outcome.
Interesting last week, Germany, which has been always very reluctant to get involved in foreign conflicts because of their own conduct in the Second World War.
Constitutional limits on it that we put in.
Exactly. But they pledged billions of pounds extra in aid last week.
Yeah.
And that's quite significant.
Well, and because they're closer than we are.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the point is, the closer you are to the Russian border, the more sensitive you are to this whole thing. You know, the Russian or Belarusian border.
And Poland, very close.
Poland would have been one of the countries that. Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, if you want to look at Putin's ambitions, just look at the map of the old Russian empires or the old Soviet empires. Every Eastern European country is in his sights. Of course they're very determined to make sure he doesn't get past Ukraine.
Our very own Liam Halligan has just written an article actually about how this military conflict is. We are taking a harder hit on this in Europe from an economy point of view than the US.
Yeah.
So that the US economy is going to grow by 1.6% this year, according to the IMF, who can be pessimistic, admittedly. And the Eurozone GDP is looking like it's half of that, with Germany heading for recession now, the UK shrinking. This war isn't terrible for Biden and America in the same way that it is for us.
No. It's a repeat of history again. I mean, Europe always pays the price.
Yeah. So is there an incentive for Biden to end? Is there an incentive for it to come to an end?
Look, there's less pressure on... At one level, economically, there's less pressure on Biden. Look, the US is a much more independent country in terms of international trade. It's got its own oil supply, it's got its own minerals and so on. Trade is, although it's huge, trade is a smaller fraction for it than it is for us. But the Americans have got to think very, very hard about what the future structure of the world looks like, right? They've got a big problem with China, which, frankly, I don't think they're being very brave about, but that's another issue. But the last thing they want is further Russian successes. You know, I mean, they had to face up to the facts in Syria that we basically lost, even though we were all committed there. So the economics, of course, doesn't hurt America as badly as it hurts us because it's less close to their doorstep. But America sees itself as the guardian of democracy.
But they also have their own fuel. I was just going to say, America also they have their own fuel supplies in a way that we don't.
Frack.
They frack.
Oh, look, at every. I mean, listen. If the rest of the world vanished, America could get by. I mean, that won't happen. But that's the truth.
We're going to talk about immigration, David, in a moment. But we're going to bring in Major General Chip Chapman now, who's joining us for more analysis. Good morning, Major General, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. What do you think Rishi Sunak will commit today when he does that joint meeting with President Zelenskyy? What military hardware do you think we're going to provide?
Well, Number 10 have already said that we're going to give hundreds of air defence missiles and further UAVs, that's unmanned aerial vehicles, but quite long-range ones up to 200 kilometres. But he also mentioned that we will make sure that the training programme for Ukrainian pilots is energised. That's interesting because, of course, at the moment, we haven't committed in the West to providing any military aircraft, particularly the F-16. And what's interesting about the statements, it does reference the F-16, which is an American plane, which the Royal Air Force doesn't have, twice. So that is what the ultimate capability, which is missing, that Zelenskyy wants from the West. And really, this meeting is the halfway point, because in the last few days, he's met both the German Chancellor, he's met the French President, he's met Ursula von der Leyen, and he's met the Polish President. So they are all amongst the major contributors. And this is the halfway point between those meetings and the G7 and Council of Europe meetings, where international solidarity to continue to resource Ukraine will be the main issue and will continue to be an issue which we will support them, because this is an ethical and just war from a Ukrainian perspective.
And is this? Is this all coming now? These pledges from all these European countries, Chip Chapman, because we think Ukraine is about to launch a major counter-offensive against the Russians?
I think what it tells you is that this isn't a one-shot weapon. We know that the wargaming which went on, certainly with General Kavoli, who's the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, with the Ukrainians, meant that they equipment they've been given so far is enough for the forthcoming offensive. Now, there's a localized offensive at the moment in Bakhmut, but not the operational level. That is the level above tactics at the moment. So this really, along with the American support last week, because they also gave another $1.2 billion, bringing their contribution to $30 billion, is to sustain Ukraine for the long war should it come to that. But it could be there's also a very short war scenario, which is a psychological and military collapse of the Russians. And that is one of the theories of victory of the Ukrainians, that military collapse leads to something akin to the 1905 and 1917 revolutions. That is sort of regime change in Moscow.
Do you see that, Chip, as the only solution in terms of victory? And David Davis just echoed this as an idea, which is that the Russian troops become demoralised. To all intents and purposes, Russia are losing and Putin is deposed. Is there any other way that it could end satisfactorily for Ukraine?
Well, we always talk about three things. It's the Clausewitzian and Trinity. Either the army collapse and therefore your campaigning ceases. You either have elite defection, that is political change within the Kremlin, which overthrows Putin, or you have the third variable, which is that the people revolt. Now, the information space means that that's not going to happen at the moment. But what was interesting from the Senate Armed Services Committee a week ago was that unless Russia have mandatory mobilization and can resource third-party ammunition from elsewhere, then they're going to be really, really suffering in the future in trying to do anything other than hold their defensive line. So it looks like, to me, that Ukraine will be in the ascendant in the next few weeks or months, and Russia would have to do something fairly significant with societal changes, with mobilization, and that is also a political risk for Putin.
All right, that's Major General Chip Chapman. Now, David Davis is still with us. David, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, Braverman, the Home Secretary, pushes PM to deliver on migrants. She's making a major speech today at a think tank. Michael Gove's going to be there too, effectively challenging the Prime Minister to sort legal migration out, which we think is going to reach 700,000 when the figures are published later this month. I thought the target in the Tory manifesto, tens of thousands. What's your response?
Andrew, can you help me here?
Right.
I mean, a question for you. Which department runs migration?
It's funny you should mention that, because it is the Home Office, which is run by Suella Braverman, and Priti Patel, who is also putting the boot in about immigration. She was Home Secretary before too.
Yeah, I mean, this is the wonderful irony of this. You know, you've got the person actually responsible for it. Now, let's just sort of cut it into bits, this problem. Number one, Brexit was partly about migration.
Yeah.
It was about our control of our own migration. It was about not having uncontrolled migration. We've got that now, OK? So every person, apart from the boat people, every person coming here legally comes because we've agreed it.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's a committee run by the Home Secretary that decides on that. So what on earth's going on there? Now, we're going to have numbers, if they're not out already, which get us close to about 1 million this year, which is huge, and it creates problems for the country. Let's not...
NHS, schools, housing.
Housing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had an increase in population of about 10 million over the last couple of decades, you know, and the houses haven't gone up by that much. So clearly there are problems. The other side of the coin, post-COVID, you know, all those people who've sort of early retired and so on, the agricultural industry still demanding more, and so on. So clearly we've got a transition to carry out. But it's not done by headlines like this. It's done by good, hard work and deciding, right, we've got to have a training programme here, we've got an incentive programme there, and so on. And the government's actually doing that.
But this is about a Home Secretary who, what she's really doing, isn't she? She's manoeuvring. Politically manoeuvring in the event. This is about her standing with Tory MPs and Tory party members in the country because she's very ambitious. She wants to be the next Tory leader.
Well, look, let me put it in bald facts. If we win the next election, Rishi Sunak will be there. But if we do, I think it's about 1 in 3 chance.
Okay.
And I think it splits evenly between Labour victory, Tory victory, or hung Parliament. That's basically, and the next year is going to dictate that. And the only condition under which people like Braverman and others will be running for leadership is if we lose, not if we win. Now, a lot of young MPs say to me, David, is this 92 or is this 97? And I say to them, that's up to you. You know, because in 92 we pulled together and we won. We overwhelmed. We were supposed to lose. People were saying, what you just said to me now, you're not going to win. But we won against the odds, right? Because we all pulled together. 97, we all started attacking each other, like that front page. And guess what happened?
Massacre.
Massacre. And that's my lesson from that, really. Of course we've got to solve this problem, but it's more than one person to solve it, of course, but she's got the lead position.
Are we letting too many in?
I think my hunch will be yes, because just on the housing front alone, there'll be young people, so they won't have much immediate demand on healthcare. They may have demand on... and there are things we should be doing. People have talked about why on earth, and I agree, why on earth are people coming to study a master's degree able to bring their family with them? They shouldn't. That's silly. Somebody's made a concession in some deal or other at some point, and they shouldn't have made the concession. So we can reverse that. So we can trim things like that. But at the end of the day, we've got to make the economy run, not by doing what Gordon Brown did, which is bring in loads of cheap labour. And I would have to analyse that million people and say, all right, how much of this is cheap labour? Because I want to get rid of that.
Because there are farmers obviously complaining that one of the reasons our food prices are so high, there's vegetables rotting in fields that British people just won't go and pick. How do we incentivise young British people, there's lots of jobs available, who don't want to go back to work, to go and pick those strawberries?
Well, it'd be the devil's own job, is what I'll say to you, because people don't want to do those jobs. We had this discussion in Cabinet many years ago, and Theresa May was talking about how she had talked to one of her strawberry farmers. And she said, well, what will you do if you can't get this labour? He said, well, I have to automate. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. You have to invest, So that's one of the dimensions, You can't, in one sense, people who say you can't rely on cheap labour is dead right. But there are ways to deal with that. Yeah. There are ways to deal with that in which we deliver better jobs for Brits. When we were doing the referendum campaign, the one statement stuck in my mind. It was a man who ran a painting and decorating company. He was working in my house. He comes from West Yorkshire. And he said he's in favour of Brexit. I said, why? He said, immigration, Mr Davis. And I thought, oh, here we go. So I said, what, don't you like foreigners? He said, oh, no. He said, if I were a Romanian or I were a Pole, I'd be here earning 3 times as much money and sending it home. It's good on them. He said, but bad on you. He said, you know why? Because I haven't had a pay increase for 10 years. And if I didn't give him a job, my son wouldn't have one. So that's what we've got to fix, And we can do that. There are ways of training, investment, encouragement back into work, all those things. But we don't need to do it as a fight on it. We need to do it as a discussion in the Cabinet Committee.
Not a fight on the front pages.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you, David Davis. Always good to see you. Right, still to come, is working from home bad for society? We're going to be discussing that next. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you
All
know Kate
sorts
Moss? Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:25. This is To The Point on GB News. Now, remember, GB News Breakfast is nominated for Best Multi-Channel Award Programme at this year's Trick Awards. We've also have Eamon Holmes, Stephen Dixon and Nigel Farage all up for Best News Presenter.
So you can scan the QR code on your screen now. Go on, do it now. Or you can head to trick.org.uk/public poll to also cast your vote. So come on, vote for them. You know they deserve to win it.
Yeah. We are the underdog. This channel is still the underdog. We still get,
which is why
undeserved criticism.
Vote for us, vote for them. It's a great endorsement for the channel. And then eat your heart out, overpaid BBC. Which you're paying through with your taxes. Which you're paying for your taxes for that inflated licence fee of £159.50.
Where they don't actually believe in free speech.
They do not.
Which we do.
Indeed.
So, can I read some views? Before we go on, let's say what you've been talking about this morning, talking of free speech. Andy has said, while my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, like so many political leaders in history, in my view, this war has now just become an expedient political distraction from domestic failure. There's nothing new about what we're seeing here.
Paul makes a very good point. It's good the UK is supporting Ukraine, Paul, I agree with that, but how many times has the UK interfered in other countries' conflicts and is paying costly for it? Don't forget the war in Iraq, Blair, 2003. The whole point the Middle East is in chaos is because of that wretched war.
And Ron says, I find it disturbing that Sunak keeps giving money to Zelenskyy when we're going through a cost of living crisis caused by the said war, in inverted commas, just another excuse to keep us poor.
Although, of course, if Putin won, imagine the cost of gas and grain coming out of Ukraine, it'll all soar. Now, we're talking about working from home, which has become the new trend since the pandemic. I couldn't bear it, actually. I don't know if you could bear it. But concerns have been raised. New research has found that the benefits of flexible working are being skewed towards higher earners.
But just how true is this? Let's hear from the director of Sync Recruitment, Stephen Shepherd. Good morning, Stephen. So we're all still kind of post-pandemic coming to terms with the significant social changes that we're experiencing. And working from home is, I would say, top 3 of the changes that we've seen in our lives. So this new research is saying that some people are benefiting and other people aren't. Just explain that for us a little.
Well, only 25% of people in the UK work in offices, and the reality is that they're the only people that this working from home practically works for. So the idea that you can legislate to force companies to allow people to work from home seems to be, at best, a bit of a distraction. I don't really see that there's much evidence for it. In fact, most young people I speak to want to work from an office. They don't actually want to work from home. And it causes a lot of problems also in terms of training, creating a working atmosphere. So I don't really see that there's, a lot of appetite for it, to be honest with you.
I mean, it's one of the things that particularly people with young children, parents have, and mums in particular, have been asking for years, a little bit more flexibility maybe, that you can do the odd day from home and it helps you pick the kids up from school and all of that sort of stuff. Do you think it's the kind of thing that just does suit some people? And I think it's particularly delineated by age, actually, because if you're in your 20s, you don't want to just sit in your bedroom on your laptop all morning. You want to be chatting around the water cooler, don't you?
I hope so.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think also there's a lot of social benefits that come from working from an office. And an office environment, it does actually work. You know, we have offices for a reason. But certainly, I mean, most of my clients have always been flexible when it comes to allowing people to work from home, say 1 or 2 days a week. So it's not probably as new as people would think. It's obviously 2019 pandemic has made it more every day. But I don't see an appetite for any kind of legislation to force companies to offer it as an option.
Stephen, I'm glad you mentioned that, of course, because this big Labour Party policy document, which leaked at the weekend, showed that Labour are considering making it a right in law to work from home. I don't know how that works if you're a nurse or a doctor. But also, the same policy document suggests that people will not be able to you can't contact people outside of normal office hours if they're at home. I wonder how that would work for your clients.
Well, it wouldn't really, to be honest with you. And I think if you're going to ask companies to be flexible, you also have to ask employees to be flexible as well. It has to sort of work both ways because, you know, if a company does well, their employees do well. And I think it's got to be viewed in more of a partnership than a sort of them and us situation. And again, sort of legislating for these things will probably cause more problems than it will solve. You know, we've gone many, many years without this legislation, and I don't really see the appetite for it. I don't really see that it's solving a problem because I don't see that there is a problem.
OK, all right, thank you. Stephen Shepherd there, Director of Sync Recruitment.
And that idea that employers will not be able to contact their employees outside of the workplace is the brilliant idea of that brilliant Labour Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. I mean, it's completely for the birds, isn't it? It is ridiculous and unenforceable.
Well, it's just not very business-friendly, is it? What's your incentive to set up a small business if you say, well, I can't ring them at 6 o'clock if a late order's come in and I need them?
And the shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been having all these meetings, we call it the prawn cocktail circuit in the city, to try to show they're business-friendly, and at a stroke, we will make people have the right to work from home, and you won't be able to be called after 6 o'clock.
Anyway, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. Still to come, Sir Keir Starmer has been accused of a cynical plot to rig future elections. We'll find out why after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:32. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is meeting the Prime Minister today in a surprise visit to the UK. The Ukrainian President is meeting Rishi Sunak at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, for what he's calling substantive negotiations over military aid. The meeting comes as the UK is pledged to send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine. It's the latest stop on the President's European tour to garner increased support from allies as Kyiv prepares for its counter-offensive against Russian forces. The Home Secretary will urge the government to stick to its manifesto pledge of reducing overall migration. In a speech at the National Conservatism Conference later, Suella Braverman will argue the UK should train its own workforce of lorry drivers and fruit pickers and be less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That's ahead of official figures released later this month, which are expected to show net migration at a record high of between 650,000 and 1 million people. Turkey's presidential election appears to be heading for a runoff, with the two candidates unlikely to clear the 50% threshold needed to avoid a second round. With almost all of the ballot boxes counted, President Erdogan led with 49% of the votes, and his rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, had 44%. If both candidates don't pass the threshold, there'll be a second round on the 28th of May. A ballot on industrial action by senior doctors in England opens today. The British Medical Association says talks have been held with the government to try and resolve the long-running pay dispute, but negotiations remain deadlocked. The Health Department says consultants were given a 4.5% pay rise last year and is urging them to carefully consider the effect of further strikes on patients. The ballot will close at the end of June. TV, online, DAB plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2484 and €1.1492. The price of gold is £1,615 and 64 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,776 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:38. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, we're delighted to have us within the studio is the political commentator Bushra Sheikh, alongside broadcaster and charity auctioneer Johnny Gould. Now, Johnny, chatting just off air, come on, tell us. You've just come back from Dubai and you flogged a car number plate. Would bore me, Richard, a car number plate, but there must be something rather special about this number plate. Tell us all.
Well, it was a charity called Billion Meals Charity, set up by the ruler of Dubai, and to feed 1 billion of the poor in the world. So you can imagine the numbers are pretty extraordinary. It was 35 lots, took 3.5 hours, and I sold a car number plate for £12 million.
I'm in complete shock.
Wow.
What's so special about this number plate?
Well, the number was J7, and 7 is not just a number that's deemed to be lucky in the world,
right,
but it's the favourite number of the ruler of Dubai. So if you've got anything to do with 7, apparently you're in his good books.
Did he buy it?
No.
Who did buy it, or don't you know?
No idea. No, but somebody with a lot of money.
Is it done on the telephone or in?
No, it was all done in person. It was 3.5 hours, 35 lots. I was on stage till 2 a.m. because it was the middle of Ramadan.
And you're the you are the world record holder, Johnny, for how much money you've earned at auction for charities, aren't you?
Well, I've got 3 world records in individual lots. I would not like to claim that I'm the world record holder because I think in America there are charity auctioneers and I've no idea what their reason. But I know in the UK, yeah.
So what's your world record?
I've world record number plate, world record mobile phone number, which I sold for £1 million, and you might like this one, Andrew. World record cricket bat, which I sold for £100,000.
£100,000. Was it signed by?
It was MS Dhoni's bat that he used to hit the winning 6 in the World Cup.
Oh.
And I think you've earned $235 million for charity. You have raised via your auctions
to date.
Brilliant.
And you've never been in an auction house in your life?
Never once.
Where did you learn?
They wouldn't allow me in.
Where did you learn it from? How did you?
I just made it up as I was going along. Gift of the gab.
You have the gift of the gab.
That's for sure. Twice, Andrew.
Yeah. God.
Bushra, good morning. How much have you made for charity? How do you follow that? It's a bit.
That's probably extraordinary.
It is brilliant,
I do lots of charity, but those numbers are significant numbers. So honestly, well done and congratulations. Anything for me when it comes to charity is huge. So
yeah.
Let's
just say finally, all the auctioneers, best auctioneers, are men, aren't they?
Yes, there's a massive hole in the market. There's a massive hole.
Yeah. Is this like this power of push that you guys have? Yeah.
Step in. There is a gap.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't
it? I think that all the charities I've been to, they've always been by men. Jeffrey Archer's a very well-known one.
Yep.
Charlie Ross. Excellent.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about this. We're still talking about money, actually, to some extent, because this is about the DEFRA, the situation with our food, Bushra. The farmers are holding crisis meetings with Rishi Sunak to say we're going to have to increase our food prices because we can't make ends meet. We cannot cope, can we, as customers, to have food prices go up again?
We can't. This is absolutely ludicrous. It's so difficult with the cost of living crisis. Families are barely coping to eat properly, to buy the right food, and if now this goes up, and obviously we've got we have inflation as well, and the fact that we've just had the Bank of England has put up the interest rate again, this is very, very difficult, and I totally understand why the farmers are asking for this, because they themselves have to make ends meet themselves. But Rishi Sunak has to step in and go, OK, what is the solution? How are we going to deal with this? Because families are not going to be able to afford the hikes.
Well, he's going to call in supermarket bosses, we understand, to number
Finally. You've been telling him to do that for weeks on this show.
How long? In the same way that previous primes have called in the oil bosses, the bankers, calling in the supermarket chiefs, because there's got to be a suspicion, Johnny. If you go to your Waitrose or your Sainsbury's and there's a reduction in one, it's the same reduction in the other shops. It's a cartel, isn't it?
It certainly appears to us less informed individuals. And you said it yourself, they've already been to the energy bosses. Surely what is the most important thing to poor families? It's food. It's the sustenance, everyday sustenance. So if ever there was a deal that needs to be done, a conversation that needs to be had, this is it.
It's a labour shortage as well, though, isn't it, Bushra? This is the fact that we've got lazy British teenagers that won't pick vegetables out of fields, and we've got a shortage of low-paid immigrants who are, for whatever reason, be that post-pandemic, the people went home to their own countries, no one's doing these jobs.
No, and the thing is, this isn't something that we've been facing today. This is a growing issue that's been happening for years. People don't do those very basic, simple jobs that we still need people in this country to do. Because what essentially people want to do are let's say, the better jobs, that are the higher paid jobs. But we still need people in these places, especially the ones that live in the UK.
Well, I've got a draconian solution. There are I checked 1.53 million people, Johnny, on out-of-work benefits. No, you're not on out-of-work benefits. Go and pick some fruit if you want your benefits. Why not?
I 100% agree. I think at the end of the day, no one should have a sense of entitlement to receive money for doing nothing. I have fond memories as a child, my dad in the holidays, when I was very young, saying, right, we're off to the strawberry fields down the road. You're going to pick strawberries all day long. And you came home with bloodied fingers, with backache, despite the fact that you're in the prime of your youth. But the reality was, it was a character-building experience. And I think, unfortunately, we've created an environment, whether it be in schools, we're in a society where there's a real sense of self-entitlement, and people need to understand the value of money and good, hard work.
Busher, what's wrong with it? Saying that you want your benefits, get off your backside and go and pick some fruit, particularly if you're young.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and I totally agree with you, Johnny. I really feel like this country gives money away for free. It's too easy to get money in this country, which is making let's say, the people that don't want to work just saying, well, actually, I can just earn more if I sit at home doing nothing.
But can I say also, guys, I think we parents are at fault.
I was just going to say,
you know, I think we've allowed this. I've allowed this. I only the other day contacted my son, who's at university, and said, do you want to earn some extra cash? And I said, I need help with my table plans for my auctions. And he goes, well, what's the rate, Dad? And I went, £12.50. He said, I'll do it for 20. I said, no,
Well, he's got his auctioneer blood. Because that's what you'd have said if it's in a charity auction,
by
wouldn't
my
you?
own petard.
So where did you end up? £15?
No, he refuses to do it for £12.50, so I've had to go elsewhere.
But that's also because, you know, youngsters these days can earn a hell of a lot more money online. They can sit at home, because I have a son, and he makes money online. He sits there, spends a couple of hours on his computer and can make double the amount that he would do.
Selling?
Doing what?
So what he does is he creates these animated, it's almost like clothing for characters for a game. And then he sells that on, and people buy those hats, shoes, gloves, just to dress their character.
Clever
There
boy.
is a huge market online.
And is he making lots of money?
He makes, I'd probably say, at least a couple of £100 a month for himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is he a teenager?
Yeah, he's a teenager, and he's at college, and he makes that little bit, you know, so he had what I deem as a side hustle. But it is easier for them to do things online, and this is the issue. The hard graft that we need people to go and do is still not being, people are not being paid enough for that because they can do other jobs that...
The other thing which be perhaps is contentious, we've got a lot of migrants in Kent, in hotels, and that we think we're going to try and put them in camps. Make them pick the flipping fruit, because they're getting money.
I don't have an issue with that concept. I think the issue then is just the logistics of it. The last thing you need
is they all do a runner.
But
they can do a runner anyway.
Yes, they can.
They're not under lock and key in the hotels.
Yeah, and I think isn't it about the fact that once you're earning money in a country, the law will then protect you from being forced out of that country.
Well, we never force them out anyway.
And maybe the law needs to change, that if you are here, then... Because most people want to work, don't they?
Every single story we cover, it just seems to be the banner is just a lack of common sense.
Yeah.
There's no common sense in it.
I know.
Well, let's talk about this other story then. This is about this NatCon conference this morning, this National Conservatism conference this morning. Our very own Jacob Rees-Mogg was talking there. Apparently his speech was disrupted this morning by a protester.
He won't mind that.
He won't mind that. He can cope with that. But Bushra, is there something about the definitions now in 2023 of what is a Conservative, what is a socialist, what do Labour represent? I think it's very difficult to distinguish between any party now.
It is, and the more conversations I have with people, the more apparent that is, actually. I feel like the parties are all merging together, and they're very, very close. It's very difficult to differentiate what party stands for what. And what we're facing now is that actually some of the parties, let's just use Conservative and Labour as an example, they are becoming very, very close. So even the policies and the things and what their manifestos say is very, very close. And that's why I think we're finding this sort of confusion about which party wants to do what.
But in terms of what we're saying about the Labour shortage, I feel, Johnny, that every party is just ready to throw out the money. You don't want to work? We'll give you money. Here's our benefits society. We're going to tax you higher than we've had in 70 years, and then we're just going to throw it all out for you all. But everybody seems to be representing that mindset now.
We live in a fearful society where the whole concept of cancellation, the cancel culture, I think is overtaken everybody. And anybody in any kind of public life is fearful of saying anything or appearing to step out of sync with everyone else. But you're absolutely right. For me, I think back to my mum. My mum voted Tory her whole life. So, I put my hand up straight away. She was a male reader. She was a Conservative. But my mum was all about fair play, hard work ethic, the concepts of low tax, which you associate with old Tory governments.
That's right.
And obviously not the present one. That obviously is true as well. But it was just that sort of basic Britishness, fair play, decency, honour, hard work. That, to me, is... And the mere fact that you're having a conference that is trying to address what is the identity it proves the point that people have lost the confidence.
After 13 years of Conservative rule, we were having a discussion about what does it mean to be a Conservative. That should have been evidence in the decisions they've been taking in the last 13 years. And it hasn't.
And it hasn't.
4 or 5 years, of course, we're in coalition with those pesky Liberal Democrats, of course.
Yeah.
And isn't it something to do, Bushra, about the fact that it feels like a lot of our leaders and our elites no longer see the UK as a country, but we have to view us as part of the global stage. Now, there are some obvious reasons why we have to do that. Of course we do. But I often worry that it feels no longer that the leaders in charge are predominantly, first and foremost, concerned with this country. They're concerned about our reputation, their reputation on the global stage.
I feel like what we're facing at the moment was the challenge of COVID. So I think right now we're kind of seeing the aftermath of that. 'Cause that's what's kind of led the parties to do what they're doing. At the moment, you have the challenge of trying to still have the vote, so you still want to retain each person to vote for you, and then you've had the issues with COVID, and then some bad decisions, which we won't go into, but I believe that the Conservative Party made some bad decisions. So what they're having to do is throw this money out at people to say, you know, technically, we're sorry that this happened, but here is some money for you, for free, you know, whatever, you don't have to work for it, but this is available to you now, so we can help you. But actually, that's not the answer. That's not the answer. So although that would make us happier to say, OK, what they're trying to do technically is cover their tracks. I feel like they made bad decisions, now they're trying to cover the tracks, and we're still having to deal with COVID. And
Johnny, there was a big conference on Saturday, another forum. This was one funded by a man called Lord Cruddas, Tory donor. It was thinly disguised as bring back Boris. That's what they were talking about. There was Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, Nadine Dorries, former Culture Secretary. Is that the answer? Boris back? How do you feel about that? Is your heart sinking or is your
funny?
heart
Everybody
soaring?
does that. Everybody does that. You take a big breath, sit back in your chair, and
is
you think.
Is your heart soaring?
You think what?
The bozzer.
OK, virtually all my friends hate him. Virtually all my friends hate him. So I'm slightly out of sync with the fact that.
Why do they hate him?
Well, they think that he's, and he is. He's dishonest. They don't consider him honourable. They think he will lie. He's selfish. He's self-centred.
Right.
He makes me laugh, which is why I can't help but have an aspect of my personality. I do have some positive feelings about him. He's charming. There's no question he's charming.
He's the best campaigner I've ever seen.
100%.
On the street.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And it's abundantly clear to me that all sorts of British citizens relate to him and like him.
Even though he's an old Etonian?
Absolutely. From all stratas of society. Therefore, you could see why he's considered an electoral asset. But at the same time, unfortunately, we are in a world where we're so divided on so many issues that my concern is that he's pretty much the most divisive of all, because you either hate him or you love him. There's no in between. And we do need almost a boring middle line.
See, the thing with Boris is if you finding him entertaining isn't the reason why we would want him to be re-elected or be elected as Prime Minister. That's not the reason why he should be. And I do agree with you that there's something endearing about his personality which is quite contagious with the public. But, you know, we have to remember that some of the decisions that he made, quite frankly, awful, you know, so having a person like that again in power, in leadership, I would definitely not vote for. But I can see why people are sort of saying, oh, maybe we should question that.
OK, let's do another story from today. This is, I mean, I don't know whether to despair or applaud this story, Johnny Gould. Highway chiefs are hunting a phantom pothole filler. We are all sick of the state of our roads.
Well, this pothole filler should be given a gong.
It's a concrete vigilante.
Yes, and good for him or her.
Do you know where this happened? It was in Cornwall. It was a place called Lost with Ill. Personally, I think they should rename it Lost the Will to Live.
Yeah.
Because decisions like this, Highways England chief, if you spent 5 minutes less hunting this man down, and 5 minutes more fixing the damn road, it's one big pothole that's so big it's closed the whole road.
I saw a pothole near me the other day. It's the size of 2 footballs. If a car goes in it, it's going to...
This was huge.
So dangerous.
And he got so sick of it. Under the dark of night, whoever he or she was went along and filled it in with concrete, and now the road is open. And, of course, they're in trouble because it wasn't done. It's closed now.
It's closed
they
opened it, then they closed it.
The thing is, I do really love that energy. I love the energy that British people are taking it upon themselves to go, we're fixing this thing now.
Up with it.
Because they are fed up. We've got potholes all
Didn't we have a
over
story
it.
very recently of Rod Stewart filling in one very near his house with a neighbour? Good old Rod Stewart.
Was it a private road, though?
No, I don't think it was. No, I think it was a country lane in their area, and maybe, you know, I guess that nobody was investing in it. The state of our roads at the moment, it is just treacherous.
Yeah.
Far be it from me to do anything, defend cyclists. I'm not a big fan of cyclists.
Yeah, but if you imagine
but
if you were
I
on a
feel
bike.
for them.
Yeah.
I really do. One road in our area in West London actually had so many potholes in it, and somebody went around with a spray can and basically sprayed each pothole with a penis around each one.
Oh, my God.
So the road was just covered in spray paint penises. So the council had no choice but to go and fill in the potholes.
Well, that's clever.
Couldn't encourage that at home,
Also,
obviously.
right, just to say to somebody who drives a car, we already are struggling to pay for stuff. These potholes damages our wheels and our alloys. We end up spending more money on our tyres, which is expensive.
I know, but maybe the answer is we put a little tax on cyclists.
Oh God, they would absolutely love that.
They wouldn't like that.
They wouldn't like that. Well,
have you heard what Cornwall Highways have said?
No, go on.
Well, they've shut it because, quote unquote, until the job's done properly.
Oh, God.
And apparently they've already said it's been closed for the whole of April already. Yeah. Apparently it's going to be at least a few weeks before it's done properly.
Because they won't do it properly.
Drives me mad, no pun intended.
Everybody mad.
No offence, but you know when people could actually go online and Google their council to see how much money they put towards the royal family's coronation, during the coronation, those numbers were significantly high. And then what I question is, could they have just not set some aside and just fixed the potholes and sort the roads out a little bit?
And have a street party.
And there weren't any on the Mall.
Exactly.
There weren't any on the Mall. Right, thank you, guys. Johnny Gould, Bushra Sheikh. Now, still to come, the Home Secretary says it is not xenophobic to call mass migration unsustainable. Do you agree? This is To The Point on Britain's News Channel.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather from the Met Office for GB News. A fine bright day for most today with sunny spells, but it's not particularly warm out there, and there are a few heavy showers around across parts of Scotland and eastern England. We have this weather front moving across the country last night. High pressure is toppling in behind, bringing plenty of fine weather, certainly to the west. But as I said, there are a few showers around. We've seen some across Scotland and a few more breaking out now across parts of eastern England. Could be one or two heavy ones, possibly even a rumble of thunder. But much of Wales, the Midlands, southwest England, Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland staying dry and bright. And even in the east, you could easily dodge the showers and have a bit of sunshine. But it's not warm. We might squeak up to 19 degrees, but generally temperatures only in the mid-teens and feeling cooler when the showers come along. And there'll still be a few of those showers around this evening over parts of northeast England especially, but they do fade away by midnight, and then most places become dry and clear before more cloud spills into northern Scotland later on. Quite a chilly night, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures. Pockets of frost can't be completely ruled out in some sheltered parts of the countryside. So a fresh start to Tuesday for sure, but generally a fine day for England and Wales. Cloud coming into northern Scotland. It's quite a grey day here with some patchy rain trickling down towards the central belt and southern Scotland later on. Perhaps clouding over a touch in Northern Ireland, but the far north may actually brighten up. The wind's coming down from the north, so still a bit of a chilly feel. Temperatures again generally around or a touch below average. Highest probably in the south, 18 or 19 Celsius. It stays fine across the south during Tuesday evening. One or two showers still across southern Scotland and northern England at this stage. But the high pressure we saw earlier is generally in control through much of this week. So bar the odd shower here and there, much of the week will be dry and bright. And slowly it will start to feel just a little bit warmer as well. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 11 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
You're the new Churchill. Well, that's what Rishi Sunak says to the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy as he drops in by helicopter to Chequers. They're talking about more military support. That'll be paid for, of course, by the taxpayer, you. You happy about that?
Suella Braverman takes on the Prime Minister with a call to cut legal migration in a major speech later this morning, and with net migration expected to be over 500,000 this year. Are you on board with that?
Supposed to be cut to tens of thousands, actually. And do we need to have more babies? That's the view of a Tory MP who says falling birth rates is the biggest threat to society. Do you agree with her?
Let us know your thoughts on all of those issues today that we're talking about. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address as always. But first of all, here's your latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Thanks very much and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is meeting the Prime Minister today in a surprise visit to the UK. The Ukrainian President joined Rishi Sunak at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, for what he's calling substantive negotiations over military aid. The meeting comes as the UK is pledged to send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine. It's the latest stop on the President's European tour to garner increased support from allies as Kyiv prepares for its counter-offensive against Russian forces. The Home Secretary will urge the government to stick to its manifesto pledge of reducing overall migration. In a speech at the National Conservative Conference later, Suella Braverman will argue the UK should train its own workforce of lorry drivers and fruit pickers and be less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That's ahead of official figures released later this month, which are expected to show net migration at a record high of between 650,000 and 1 million people. Well, former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg told us the UK needs more automation to be more productive.
By relying on low-skilled migration over the last 30 years, we have seen very low increases in productivity. And part of the reason for that, I wouldn't say the whole reason, but part of the reason for that is we haven't mechanised as we should have done. So fruit picking remains an extremely labour-intensive operation. And not all fruits can be picked mechanically, but some can. And why haven't we been investing in the machinery which can then be operated by higher skilled, better paid people? So it's about increasing productivity so that you can increase wages.
Also at the conference, Miriam Cates has warned the falling birth rate in the UK poses the biggest threat to British conservatism and Western society. In the 1960s, British women had an average of 2.6 children. It's now less than 1.6. The MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge says there'll be no future if we don't reverse this trend.
Even without further fall, in just 2 generations' time, there will be 40% fewer births than there are today. That is population collapse. You cannot be socially liberal and economically conservative. If you think that government and society should have nothing to say about the conditions that promote strong families, do not be surprised when you end up with a high-tax, high-spend economy, with a nation of broken people dependent on the state.
Turkey's presidential election appears to be heading for a runoff, with the two candidates unlikely to clear the 50% threshold needed to avoid a second round. With almost all of the ballot boxes counted, President Erdogan led with 49% of votes, and his rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, had 44%. If both candidates don't pass the threshold, there'll be a second round on the 28th of May. Journalist Ali Mustafa told us he thinks Erdogan has no rival.
Inflation, this runaway inflation, 174% unofficially. Earthquake, which has killed more than 50,000 people, destroyed a huge chunk of this country, the size of parts of Britain, some would argue, didn't really matter because it came down to culture wars. And when Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition candidate, made an informal alliance with the HDP, the pro-Kurdish HDP, it became a question of security versus terrorism.
A ballot on industrial action by senior doctors in England opens today. The British Medical Association says talks with the government to try and resolve the long-running pay dispute remain deadlocked. The union claims the average doctor's salary has dropped by 35% over the past decade before inflation is considered. The Health Department says consultants were given a 4.5% pay rise last year and is urging them to carefully consider the effect of further strikes on patients. The ballot will close at the end of June. Meanwhile, 2 teacher unions have opened new ballots on further strike action. It's after members of the National Association of Head Teachers and the National Education Union rejected the latest pay offer from the government. Voting will close at the end of July, with potential strike action to take place in the autumn term. The Royal College of Nursing has revealed nurses fear being taken to court over the level of care they give to patients. The union says more than 9 out of 10 nurses raised concerns that patients may be receiving unsafe care due to their working conditions. Some nurses have described feeling suicidal as they deem corridor treatment degrading for patients. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
So, Rishi Sunak has paid the ultimate compliment to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, calling him the new Winston Churchill. What do you make of that, as the Ukrainian president arrived in the UK for a surprise visit?
They're discussing, of course, the war at the PM's country residence checkers, and, of course, we know there's going to be commitment from the Prime Minister to more military aid.
Well, joining us now for more on this is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. That's quite a compliment.
It is, and some people might feel a little uncomfortable with it. Other people will agree with the fact that this is a wartime leader who is in charge of a country facing, almost an existential threat, if you like. And others would look at this as the biggest battle we've seen in Europe since the end of the Second World War. But be in no doubt, what Rishi Sunak is trying to do today, and you look at their social media videos online of the Chinook helicopter landing at Chequers. He's the first foreign leader to go to Chequers. These pictures coming in this morning, as you'll see, though, not from our lot, as in the broadcast bill, but rather from these things being filmed as part of the Downing Street operation or President Zelensky's operation. It is, from Rishi Sunak's point of view, trying to show that the UK is wholly committed to Ukraine, that he will stand shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky, in essence also because he knows that's where the majority of the Conservative Party are right now, and that's what they would expect. As for President Zelensky, he's been on another charm offensive around Europe over the last couple of days, whether it's been Germany, the Vatican, France, and now the UK. What he needs, what he wants, unsurprisingly, is more weapons, and it seems like Britain's going to give him some.
And it's not just the Tory party that's behind it, it's the whole of Parliament that's behind it. Dan,
yeah, I mean, there's very few...
There's the odd noise off, but not
there's
many.
very few. I mean, from the SNP through... I mean, it's not often you get the SNP, Labour, the Lib Dems and the Conservative Party all, frankly, on the same page. I mean, I was in Westminster Hall back in February when President Zelensky addressed MPs there, and it's fair to say that there was almost a palpable sense of anticipation, almost excitement about this guy, and I think that's why Rishi Sunak's used that claim today about Winston Churchill.
He's a great communicator.
Very
As you'd expect from a former actor.
Well, indeed, and in many ways, you see that often, don't you, with world leaders sometimes. Ronald Reagan, obviously
Tony Blair,
who've come from the field. Donald Trump, another good example.
Brilliant.
Whatever you think about Donald Trump, there's undoubtedly he's a great communicator because he's a kind of former TV star to a degree. He knows how. As we've just seen from these pictures, and we see it all the time, President Zelensky knows how the media works. And media and propaganda, let's be honest about this, is vital in any war. Absolutely vital.
This is all distracting, of course. We've got in the studio with us Peter Barnes, political commentator, from this conference that's taking place today where Suella Braverman's going to lecture the Prime Minister about immigration. She's the Home Secretary, she's in charge of it. It's also where we're going to hear that David Frost, who was the Boris Johnson's Brexit advisor, who effectively got Brexit done, he's announcing he is going to be a candidate, he hasn't found a seat yet, to be an MP at the next general election.
Yeah, that generally doesn't surprise me. It's been no secret around Westminster that Lord Frost has been kind of touting his way on the candidates list. There's a rumour going around, according to some websites, that he might take on Andrew Bridgen's seat. But for that one, we're just... Yeah.
He's a guy who he was kicked out of the Tory party and he's gone to, is it Reform or Reclaim?
I think he's got to Reclaim.
Reclaim.
Yeah. So there's rumours flying around about where he's going to go, but it's when it comes to Lord Frost, it's one of the worst kept secrets, really. It's one of those things everybody knows.
Very interesting. He hired a commercial public relations agency to handle all of this, which is quite unusual in the political domain.
It's getting more common. If we look at Nadeem Zahawi, he hired a big PR firm as well when he tried to run to be Tory leader rather unsuccessfully. Yeah. It's becoming more common that politicians are looking more to kind of polish up their image, and more times out of 10, it's actually about trying to quieten down some of the more controversies that they've been involved in. Because obviously, Lord Frost being a big Brexiteer, he has to be careful what seat he runs in.
I'm glad we're using his title because he's Lord Frost. Lords can't run for election.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to give up his peerage.
So yeah, that's.
But does he give up his peerage when he gets a safe seat, or now to show his commitment?
And who's probably the most famous person who's done that in the past? Tony Benn, of course.
Of course.
Tony Benn. Yeah. I mean, a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Talking of Westminster, Olivia Utley is down there for us this morning. Good morning, Olivia.
Good morning, Bev.
Good morning. What's happening down there this morning?
Well, yes, it was a pretty dramatic start to the NatCon conference here in Westminster. We had a speech from Jacob Rees-Mogg, was the first proper address where he was talking about issues with immigration in the country, the problems with protectionism in the country, but it was interrupted very dramatically at the beginning by a man who came on wanting to talk to us all about the dangers of fascism. Now, he was bustled off the stage very quickly, but really, I think that the woman of the moment is rising star of the Conservative Party, Miriam Cates, who did her opening speech this morning on what she perceives is the biggest danger to Britain, that is bigger than China, bigger than big tech, bigger than Iran, and that is the falling birth rate, the number of women just not having babies. And I'm actually here with Miriam Cates in the hall today. And Miriam, that was a really, really rousing speech, and you definitely had the audience on side. Do you really believe, is it not an exaggeration to say that the birth rate is the biggest issue facing Britain?
Well, I think if we're concerned about our future beyond the immediate, short-term 5 to 10 years, then it absolutely is. And of course, it isn't just Britain that's facing a low birth rate. Countries across the Western world are facing very similar, and in fact, some countries in a worse position than us, like Finland, that I mentioned in my speech. But I think the temptation for politicians often is only to talk about the economy. And actually, we need strong families, we need strong communities, we need people to have children if we want to build a strong economy in the future. And I think sometimes we're too afraid to talk about the family because we're afraid of culture wars or afraid of feeling judgmental. But the point that I tried to make is that the state can't be neutral on these issues. We either favour having children and support people having children, or we don't. And I want to move to a culture where we very much do value children and people who want to be parents.
That's interesting what you say about the culture, because the sort of prevailing consensus is that the reason why women are choosing not to have children is simply because they can't afford it, because the economy is set up wrong. But from what you were saying this morning, it sounds like you think it's something deeper than that.
Well, I think that certainly is one of the reasons, and things like housing and student debt certainly mean that people have to become older before they're able to think about this. But I think it is a much wider thing, and it's about we don't value parenting, we don't value children, the way our tax system is set up, the narrative, in fact, that many politicians have about, you must get as much education to have the most fulfilling career that you can possibly have. And I'm not saying those things aren't good, of course they are. But actually, when you get to your deathbed, are you really going to say, I wish I'd spent more time in the office, or I wish I'd spent more time with children, or I wish I'd had children? These are fundamental issues of people's fulfilment and satisfaction in life, is having children and raising the next generation. And as politicians, we should be trying to create the conditions that at least make that possible for people if that's what they want to do.
Well, Jeremy Hunt, in his budget, was widely lauded for trying to do that, it seemed, by offering free childcare to women who wanted to go back to work. But from your speech this morning, it sounded like you don't think that is actually a particularly progressive policy. Can you just explain?
Absolutely, and I strongly disagree with that policy. And, whilst I completely agree with Jeremy Hunt that we should be investing in the first few years of children's lives, I don't think that's the way to go about it. I think, firstly, because, biology and psychology and research tell us that, that bond with mum, especially in the first 2 years of life, is really important for lifelong fulfilment and lifelong security. And as a government, we shouldn't be trying to break that by saying to women, you can only have support from the state if you leave your 9-month-old in the care of a stranger. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with childcare, and there's some brilliant childcare workers out there, but fundamentally, if what we're saying as a country is that the role of women is to get back into the workplace and contribute to GDP, that really devalues motherhood and the unique nature of motherhood and what women can offer to their children. And it's those kind of things that just skew the narrative away from having children for their own sake, raising them as an investment in society, and towards us all just being contributors to GDP, which doesn't bring the kind of satisfaction that I think some people believe it does.
Well, thank you very, very much, Miriam Coates. It's really great to speak to you, and thank you for your speech this morning too. So that's it from NatCon for now, but we will be back in a couple of hours with all the latest, and we're expecting to hear Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, speak later.
All right, that's Olivia
Thank you.
That
Miriam Cates, MP there.
We're still with Peter Barnes, political commentator. You used to work at Tory HQ. This conference will be viewed with absolute horror in Number 10 because Suella Braverman's going to attack the Prime Minister on immigration, even though she's in charge of immigration policy. Jacob Rees-Mogg has spoken, former Cabinet Minister. But Michael Gove is there too, who is the Levelling Up Secretary. So difficult to say it's a hotbed of dissidents.
Yeah, so this is the thing. There's lots of rumblings about Tory revolts, but I'm very much of a kind of I'll believe it when I see it kind of guy. Like, we keep hearing things of great rebellions all the time, and they never really come to anything. What I think this kind of conference and the one just last weekend with Lord Cruddas and that kind of group, I think what we're seeing
that was Bring Back Boris.
Basically it was a Bring Back Boris conference. But I think what we're seeing is a lot of the party saying to Number 10, get your act in order, sort yourselves out. After the kind of kicking that they got the locals, I think there's a lot of discontent, not just amongst party members, but now we're starting to see it in the councillors and also in the officials and even in the parliamentary party. They're starting to make grumbles, and it could be a bit of a problem for Rishi Sunak because he's got some big bills on the agenda.
And Darren, he'd been doing pretty well. The poll lead for Labour was tightening. He seemed to be on the front foot on so many things, but then the local election results were at the worst end of the projections.
They were, and we read today that I think Labour's own research suggests that up to a quarter of those people, Lib Dems, who backed the Lib Dems in the election, would switch to Labour, which in theory would make it even more difficult because they'd be winning some more seats. I think for Rishi Sunak, you're right. He got the Windsor framework, which actually was incredibly politically tricky, whether you agree with the deal or not. But Tory MP support that. Clearly, there's been very few rebellions, not least of all on the immigration bill, where there's concerns that could get scuppered. And he has particularly managed to tighten the poll lead between him and Keir Starmer when it comes to who do you think would be best as Prime Minister. However, at the end of the day, as good or bad as you think Rishi Sunak has, he can also defy kind of gravity, political gravity, if you like. And that is the fact that the Conservative Party have been in power for 13 years. They've spun through 3 leaders in the last year. Of course, they are a discontented bunch. And the problem, I think, for the Conservative Party is the public knows they're a discontented bunch. And when it comes to the next election, this is going to be their biggest challenge of genuinely being able to present a united platform for the future.
And
we see that today, and a fresh one. We see that today with Suella Braverman, who, frankly, is taking chunks out of cabinet ministers on immigration figures.
And listening to Miriam Cates there, that's a very fresh take on that debate. And trust me, she's got 3 kids, I've got 3 kids. She makes me think, and I like that in politicians.
Yeah. But the weird thing is that could be Stella Creasy making that exact same argument.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating that I think, whether you're right or left, there is starting to build a viewpoint here that actually, parenthood and our focus on getting people constantly into work sometimes has been to the detriment, particularly of women who have left having kids later in life, to the point where actually lots of women have left it so late they find it really, really difficult indeed. And so I think whether, again, it's a left or right issue, there is a focus on the fact that actually we've been too focused on the wider economy and not necessarily on
I
welfare.
think what she's saying is very different to what Stella Creasy said, unless there's something that's passed me by, because I don't really hang on every word that I hear from Stella Creasy. But from what Miriam Cates is saying there is encourage women to stay at home. That's a very different message.
But I think it was about... But on the essence, she was saying is because that we should be less focused on kind of like contributing to GDP figures and more focused on actually what's better for kids, families. And I think, again, I don't think that necessarily is a party political thing. I know sometimes people on the right have suggested kind of family values and women staying at home is a more conservative traditional view, and maybe it's the point in that. But I think a lot of people on the left feel very uncomfortable with the fact that if women want the choice and the support of being able to stay at home and raise their children, they should be allowed to do so. The state should be supporting that as well.
And Peter, the Prime Minister will listen to what Miriam Cates said, very interesting, but he's going to concentrate on GDP, economy, cost of living, and not the rights of women to have kids at home.
I think you're right there. It's one of Rishi's 5 pledges to half inflation, and he's going to have a huge focus. The economy is going to be the issue at the next election. There's no getting around that. But I do think Rishi will be a little bit deaf and a little bit silly if he doesn't listen to people like Miriam Cates. She's a particularly rising star in the Conservative Party now.
She's not a minister.
Yeah, I exactly the same here. I actually had to double check whether she was one, just considering what the platform that she's got now. But again, Rishi, if he doesn't really listen to this kind of wing of the party, this kind of growing movement, and maybe not kind of co-opt it, but at least kind of listen to them, bring them into the fold, as it were, I think he's going to be in for a lot of trouble.
It's quite nice to hear a woman talking about women's issues rather than Jeremy Hunt telling me what to do with my kids.
Well, this has been one of her big things, really, and I know she got quite a lot of flack over the trans debate, and I think she kind of became really good friends with Rosie Duffield as well. So they've kind of
the Labour MP who got into trouble on her own side.
On her own side. So there is it is interesting to see there's a particular fight back in Parliament on both sides of the House,
the
which
Tories
is amazing.
should get stuck into the culture wars because the public would be on their side. They're not on the side of the SNP trying to enable children to change their gender without talking to mum and dad at the age of 15.
Yeah, I think but the thing is, though, when you look at the polls and you go, what are the biggest issues facing the country? What are you most concerned about? Actually, those issues are pretty low down. It is essentially, how am I going to pay the bills?
It may be low down, but it brought down Nicola Sturgeon.
How can I get a doctor? Yeah, partly.
Right, thank you, gentlemen. Now, still to come, Kensington Palace has released a stunning behind-the-scenes video of the Prince and Princess of Wales at the King's coronation last week. Have you seen it?
I have.
It's very, very slick. If you haven't seen it, stick here. You're with GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 11:24. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. This is To The Point.
Now, remember, GB News Breakfast is nominated for Best Multi-Channel Award Programme at this year's Trick Awards. We have Eamon Holmes, Stephen Dixon and Nigel Farage all up for Best News Presenter.
You can scan the QR code, so please do it right now on your screen, or you can head to trick.org.uk/public poll to cast your vote. Don't forget our chance to beat the overpaid, inflated BBC.
I got a message from my mum. She likes watching the show, Andrew. And she said, I'm too old to know how to scan a QR code. How do I do that? You've got a point, Mum.
Don't look at me.
But you know what? Go to trick.org.uk or Google Trick. It's TRIC, no K, Television, Radio and Industries Club /public poll and cast your vote.
Failing that, ask your grandchildren, because they will certainly know how to do it. Now, Kensington Palace has released, it's frankly a stunning behind-the-scenes video of the Prince and Princess of Wales, that's William and Kate, of course, at the King's coronation last week.
So the Princess of Wales also made a surprise appearance on Saturday's grand finale of the Eurovision Song Contest.
Is this the style of public engagement, a preview of what's to come? We're joined now by former royal correspondent for The Sun, Charles Ray. Charles, I thought that it looked fantastic, but a little bit of me was uneasy because I thought, wasn't it all meant to be last week about the King and Queen Camilla? Did they need to do this? Although, is this showing we are the next generation and how fabulous we look?
I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. I think as we're showing it's the next generation. It was a fabulous little video, especially the little cameo performances from Charlotte and Louis, who came into the room just before the mother walked in all her resplendent glory. But isn't it interesting, Andrew, that from last week, we are now seeing a little bit more of the children of the family. Now, this couple, this family, are an ad man's dream. That's like they've been put together specifically, you know, to get the votes. And, you know, when we saw them last week at the coronation, you know, the big lunch, the volunteer, the scouting thing, it really is great. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to see the kids all the time, but clearly we're going to get glimpses of them growing up. And I just think it is absolutely wonderful. Coupled with that photograph as well of the three possible kings together, you know, Charles, William and George, I mean, that just secures the monarchy and tells the doommongers that the monarchy is safe for at least the next 100 years.
Charles, I had a friend who was at a Buckingham Palace garden party for the first time last week, and he said it was extraordinary. The crowds flocked around Kate, around the Princess of Wales. They were, of course, interested in Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Not quite so interested, it's fair to say, in the wonderful, redoubtable Princess Anne.
Yeah, I think you're right as well. And the thing about William is he's not making the same mistakes that his father made when he was married to Princess Diana. And everybody thought Princess Diana was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and still is in my view. But you know, you've got now Catherine, who is following in those footsteps. And this is a woman who could wear sackcloth and ashes and still look absolutely brilliant. I mean, you briefly mentioned the Eurovision Song Contest. It was probably the best thing in the Eurovision Song Contest because the rest of it was completely
certainly better than the British song. Certainly better than the British song, Charles.
Oh, well, it was certainly better than the British song. But in my opinion, it was a lot better than most of the other songs as well. I mean, it was that was completely rehearsed in complete privacy. And if you remember, just before the contest started, there were people saying, "Oh, there's a big surprise. There's a big act going to come along." And well, who could have guessed it was going to be the Princess of Wales? I know she only played 10 seconds, but it was 10 seconds of magic, and it just repeats what she did in December 2021 with the musician Tom Walker at that Christmas thing, and also follows on from what Princess Diana did in Australia in 1988 and in Prague in 1991. Played the piano brilliantly.
Charles, I wonder if, well, this is William and Kate raising their game in the aftermath of Harry and Meghan, isn't it? Harry and Meghan could have been the couple that were going to film everything in high definition. I mean, we've just seen the footage there. They've got drones they've hired in. It's beautifully edited. I wonder if this, in a way, has been inspired by what was clearly a competition between the two couples. And now you've got the victorious Kate and William riding off into the sunset in absolute style.
I don't disagree with you, Bev. I just think that this is the Waleses setting out their stall. You know, you just have to have a look wherever they turn up, wherever they do. There's just thousands of people there. They certainly want to get a glimpse of Catherine. But let's not forget William. He is the future king, and he's very popular. He was at the Women's Cup final yesterday, pressing the flesh and everything else. He got a great reception from everybody. This is the couple of the future. This is where our future lies with the monarchy. And we'll be seeing a lot more of them, on the treadmill.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Charles. Charles Ray there from The Sun. Thank you so much. You just feel like you want to keep your fingers crossed for them, don't you?
Yeah, but it's interesting what Charles said about Prince Charles not made the same mistake with Prince Diana, because Prince Charles was jealous of the outpouring of public affection, because he'd be doing the walkabout and he'd look up and they were flocking around the beautiful fairy tale princess. She was new, she was beautiful. Charles been around a long time, and he's never been beautiful.
You feel like Prince William would just be like, fine, take the attention, I'm happy.
He wants the monarchy to be a success, and he saw, as a young man, as he saw what happened.
He once gave me a lift to an airport, Prince William.
Oh.
I know, I never told you that story. I might save that for the day.
Well, do say. I think we need to know more.
And then
was it just
Anna
the two
bumped
of
into
you?
Kate in Starbucks in Henley-on-Thames.
Was it just the two of you?
I'll tell you. I'll save that. I'll save that cliffhanger.
Should the Princess of Wales know about this?
They were together.
Yes.
Now, still to come, Zelenskyy is meeting with the Prime Minister with hopes to garner increased support from allies, as usual. But just how much more support can the UK give to Ukraine? Find out after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 11:31. The Prime Minister has compared President Zelenskyy's wartime leadership to that of Winston Churchill. The Ukrainian president is with Rishi Sunak at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, for what he's calling substantive negotiations over military aid. The meeting comes as the UK's pledged to send hundreds of new long-range attack drones to Ukraine. It's the latest stop on the president's European tour to garner increased support from allies as Kyiv prepares for its counter-offensive against Russian forces. The Home Secretary will urge the government to stick to its manifesto pledge of reducing overall migration. In a speech at the National Conservative Conference later, Suella Braverman will argue the UK should train its own workforce of lorry drivers and fruit pickers and be less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That's ahead of official figures, which are expected to show net migration at a record high of between 650,000 and 1 million people within the past year. A ballot on industrial action by senior doctors in England opens today. The British Medical Association says talks with the government to try and resolve the long-running pay dispute remain deadlocked. The Health Department says consultants were given a 4.5% pay rise last year and is urging them to carefully consider the effect of further strikes on patients. The ballot will close at the end of June. Meanwhile, 2 teachers' unions have opened new ballots on further strike action. It's after members of the National Association of Head Teachers and the National Education Union rejected the latest pay offer from the government. Voting will close at the end of July, with potential strike action to take place in the autumn term. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2492 and €1.1491 euros. The price of gold is £1,614 and 39 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,784 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:37. You're with To The Point on GB News. Few of your views. Oh, actually, no, I want to show you this.
Yeah, this is good.
We've got to show you this.
GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Cabinet Minister, of course, he was speaking at this National Conservatism conference this morning, And look what happened.
Well, there we go. Our jolly good fellow has had to leave, but we believe...
So if you're listening to this on the radio, basically there's a lectern, a stage, national conservatism, Jacob Rees-Mogg at the lectern, and a grey-haired suited gentleman ran on and heckled
Which we all think
something.
is funny, but actually you do have to think security issues are... and remember a couple of years ago, Theresa May was making her speech as Prime Minister and some creep comedian handed her a P45.
Oh, yeah.
Very funny, ha-ha. How is that allowed to happen when she's got about 6 armed protection officers around her? Now, Jacob doesn't have that, but it's funny, and Jacob handled it very well. But
Yeah.
security should be an issue.
Well, political commentator Bushra Sheikh is back with us, and also Johnny Gould are here as well. What do you make of that, Bushra, when we see footage like that? And Andrew has a point, doesn't he, about the security?
You have to question that. There must be security until the fact that you can have one man enter and get on the stage, that's quite frightening.
Could have had
actually.
a knife, a gun, acid.
Totally. I mean, that raises questions. Like, when you have people anywhere, how are these individuals getting through?
Yeah. Because for those listening on the radio, he was suited and booted with a tie on, grey hair, probably in his 60s, maybe later. But lunatics come in all ages and shapes and sizes.
I mean, did he just manage to get in? Because we didn't see the bit of before.
No,
Did he just run onto stage or something?
Maybe.
Is that part of the cut and thrust, Johnny? Do we have to put up with that?
happened on a football pitch over the weekend. Eddie Howe, the manager of Newcastle, got confronted by a Leeds fan.
Did he?
Who's now banned for life, rightly so. It seems to be a worrying trend.
But more difficult for a Leeds fan to attack Eddie Howe because he'd have 22 players on the pitch would jump to his defence. But, of course, if he'd got a knife...
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's photos of them literally standing there and the look on Eddie Howe's face of, like, how's this guy got here?
Yeah.
But he's right in front of him. So, yes, I mean, it is a potentially life-threatening situation.
And
I mean, I'm all in favour. I think the most important thing to say is, obviously, people should be allowed to demonstrate and put their views across. But there has to be limits.
Yeah.
And where somebody's life can be threatened, and we all know
And
what.
Jacob has been harassed before. I remember seeing it. He had his own son with him, who was about 12 or 13, and they were surrounded by these deranged anti-Brexiteers chanting abuse. It's not fair on a 12-year-old boy.
No, it's not fair regardless of your political viewpoint.
And Jacob is very stoical. Look, that guy could be 70, old enough to know better.
Yes, extraordinary. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, will be on your TV on GB News tonight at 8 o'clock, and I imagine he's penning his monologue as we speak to tell you all about that. Right, Bushra, so Keir Starmer has been accused of a cynical plot to rig future elections by reducing the voting age to 16 and also giving the vote to EU citizens living here. What do you make of that?
Two things here. So you've got trying to reduce the age, but I do believe that perhaps that still is a little bit too young. I believe you've got to have some level of sense of understanding what's going on for an individual.
16-year-olds.
Oh, I know some stupid 60-year-olds.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's way too young. But I can understand what he's trying to do with the EU. I do get that. I believe what he's saying actually isn't right. I believe people who have supported the economy for a long time should get the vote, even though, let's just say, they're not official.
2.5 million.
Yep.
It's a backdoor attempt, in my view, to get Brexit back undone.
Yep.
And we would be the only country in Europe to do this. No other country in the EU allows EU citizens who are not homegrown to vote in their elections. So why should we?
Because, look, there is a question out there. We have people that have been a part of the economy for more than 20 years. They are married to British citizens. They have children at our schools. They're the ones that are saying that why can we not get the opportunity to vote? Because we have been here. We may not be official British citizens, but we have contributed. So I can understand that. So perhaps what he's saying here, which I believe when I was sort of reading into this, is maybe if you've done a certain level of time and supported the economy maybe for 15 or 20 years, that perhaps you get the vote.
I need to remind people, of course, Keir Starmer, who let them in the first place and encouraged mass migration from Eastern Europe, Labour.
He did, but that's also not a bad thing. It's not. I don't believe the sort of mass migration is the issue. I think if you've contributed to an economy for a substantial amount of time, you should get it.
Johnny?
Immigration is definitively a good thing if regulated, if controlled, and I think that was the issue that's always been the bugbear. I'm going to go with the numbers that you've just mentioned, Andrew. I've read different numbers. 3.4 million EU citizens settled status, 2.6 are pre-settled, who could potentially be fast-tracked. That's now 6 million. 1.4 million kids between 16 and 18. I mean, that one really, I lose my head over that one. So we are talking about potentially 7.5 million add-on to the franchise. We all know what Blair and Brown did with the open gate policy that added, I think it was 3 million to the British population. And the stats are that that a government that allows you into a country or gives you voting status, 80 to 85% are literally guaranteed to vote for that government. So it does change the whole perspective.
And Johnny, when the rules changed to allow people from Eastern Europe, the newly enlarged EU, to come into Britain, Blair was encouraged and advised by the Tories and everybody else to bring in transitional arrangements. So there was restrictions on how many could come in, because that's what happened in other countries like France and Germany. Blair knew best, and Robin Cook, the Foreign Secretary, was at a press conference, he said there'll only be 15,000 in the first year. 750,000 in year one. And they knew it. It was a cynical ploy to change the country.
Which is what they're suggesting here. Now, I see Keir Starmer hasn't confirmed or denied that this is his intention.
He's waiting to see what the view of the public is.
But if it is his intention, I've seen one Labour MP defend the plan. They want to strengthen our democracy. That really sticks in my face.
Isn't the problem is that the youngsters and immigrants are more likely to vote for Labour? So this means that the Tories would just have to work that little bit harder to convince, because you know what I want to see in our voting? I want more people to vote. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Yeah. It's political disillusionment and detachment and demoralisation.
They have to work hard, Bev, to overturn the votes of 7 million new voters.
I totally agree. You'd have to work obscenely hard, and I don't think it's physically possible. You're talking about elections, literally, that small swing vote is what determines whether you have majority government or not, or you're in opposition. So 7 million is anything but a small swing vote. That's a massive block vote, assuming they all vote. But here's the other issue, and I think Andrew made the valid point about how you compare to other countries, particularly in the European. My brother lives in France, has done for 25 years. I just gave him a quick call. He's been living there 25 years. He's still a British citizen. He pays tax. He's been a resident. He's allowed to vote in a local election, but he never has done because he doesn't think he's got the right. But he has the legal right. He is not allowed to vote in the Senate, which is basically the general election, the national, or the presidential election. That's France. That's a country that tore down, Louis the emperor. I mean, the ultimate socialist country. Even they don't give those sort of rights.
No, exactly.
But I do think about the 16-year-olds. That's quite interesting, Bushra, because I want to see a more politically engaged electorate growing up and growing forward. And maybe at 16, the thrill of being 16, you go and vote. And then the parties have to then start appealing to those youngsters as well, who don't get spoken to in elections at all.
Fair point. And I believe that's really important for our kind of youngsters to understand why it's important to vote. The issue is that a lot of 16-year-olds are not interested, right? This is what we're saying. So how do we get them involved in the voting? How do we make them understand that these are the parties and these are the policies and this is what we're setting out? So maybe he does have a point. Maybe he has a point about getting them involved.
When my son was this age, his school, which was a state school in Bath, they ran an election during the national election. They ran their own, got the kids all to vote. And I think that's a great way to engage. The idea, though, that you're actually going to give the vote, the actual vote, to people that are not allowed to drive, the people that are not allowed to...
well, they can't get married.
They can't get married. I can't get my head round that they can't do any of that, but we can give them a vote to determine the future of our country.
And also, you don't trust them to have a credit card. But they can vote. And what will they do? Well, they vote because Mum and Dad says you'll vote for this, or will they actually say, Mum and Dad, if Mum and Dad say vote X, they're going to vote Y, aren't they?
100% that.
There we are.
Definitely that.
But also, we actually still have adults. We actually still have adults that don't go and vote.
That's what I mean.
Adults,
Let's get those people
not even teenagers.
Well, this would be the biggest change in the voting system since 1928, when all women got the vote, because from 1918 it was women under the age of 30. Then they changed it to 21 for everyone. That was a massive and hugely important step. This would be a retrograde step.
I totally agree. And I think we all need to go and watch Brewster's Millions, the movie, where you had the option to put none of the above. That's what we need to introduce. And then, if you don't turn up and you don't tick one of those boxes, the old excuse of, but I don't like any of them, well, then tick none of the above.
The ballot.
If you don't turn up, get fined, like they do
I've
in
always
Australia.
said that to people who say they won't vote. So go to the ballot paper and make your protest by saying none. It's not illegal. It's a very good step. And they're counted.
Yeah.
None of the above. They are counted.
Right. New report, talking of teenagers, suggests that the majority of teenagers know someone at school, 1 in 10, Bushra, that want to change their gender.
Massive. This is absolutely... This is so bizarre to me because I already know how much the social sort of influence, or let's say the power that schools have at the moment with sort of sex education and how they're teaching our children. I know a lot of people say that, you know, this is a woke agenda, but this for me is quite concerning because I already know that there is a link to your, let's say, sexual identity or your gender. There is a mental health link to this. So what I'm questioning now is it too much that the schools are doing? Because I've got children and they do come back to me and they say, Mum, this is what's happening. So the fact that we have, I think it's like 50% at the moment, which is a huge, huge number.
Where did this come from, Bushra?
It's come from, it's just this whole reform of the kind of sex education that's being pushed in the schools.
It's come from a very sort of permissive attitude towards children, Johnny, and the fact that nobody can say no to a child anymore. I think and also it's about for children, you know, children in care or who have been in care are very overrepresented in the statistics around transgender transitioning. So there is a tie with a mental health condition, but we're not in terms of attachment maybe or depression. And so I think there's too many teenagers who think, I don't like my life for whatever reason, young trauma existing, or, you know, I don't like my life. The solution will be I'll become a different gender. And they're surrounded then by teachers, social workers, psychotherapists saying, yes, we agree and we can't say no to you, we can't question it, and this is going to make you happy. And it may not.
My first reaction to all this is I'm horrified that parents have no input or seem to have minimal to little to no input in terms of what is being taught to their children, what is being discussed. And your point, Bushra, about the sex education that's going on in schools, I'd be horrified if a young child of mine was being exposed to this at an age when I think it's completely age inappropriate. I also agree with you that there is a very worrying connection between children in care, children from single-sex families, from single-parent families, sorry. I am concerned about the mental health issues. It seems to me that it's something that we so don't understand and are not on top of. Why are we allowing such significant decisions to be made until such time as we do understand it, until we've done more?
And Johnny, we talked on this programme before, we've heard from you saying teachers are calling parents at home saying your child is now identifying as X. How is that allowed in the school without the parents' consent or discussion?
Don't you think it's ironic that teachers aren't allowed to do anything when it comes to any kind of disciplining of a child, and yet they're allowed to make statements like that to a parent?
And in Scotland, we're just seeing a bit more of here. I bet you can't wait.
Okay,
Rishi Sunak with taking his jacket off now. He's getting all cool now, Rishi Sunak. With Zelenskyy in his war fatigues, they're wandering around the grounds of Chequers. It's a nice image.
Luckily, we changed the strap underneath, which said most teenagers have transgender friends, as we saw these two together. That was not talking about Zelenskyy and Sunak. Here they are walking through Chequers.
The gardens are amazing at Chequers, actually, and it's a great thrill for Zelensky's bit. But you could see Rishi's will milk this for all he can. Who's going to be worrying about what the Home Secretary is saying at that conference there about immigration?
And do you not think this man is going to change the whole concept of leadership? He's always in his khaki green. He looks like a man of business.
And the Prime Minister has described him as the new Winston Churchill. Now, that will offend some people, but it will cause a great debate. It's a great distraction. I think Zelenskyy is a terrific war leader.
I can't agree more.
He's a great communicator.
100%. And you know what? He's real, and I think that's what people relate to, whether they're British people.
And it's a great relief that the Prime Minister resisted the temptation, like he did before, to try to dress like Zelenskyy in his helmet and his fatigues. He looked, I'm afraid,
it did look a bit
silly.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous is a better word, Johnny.
Do you trust him, Bushra?
No, I don't.
You don't trust Zelenskyy?
I don't.
Me neither.
No.
Don't you trust Putin a lot less?
Yes, but I think I think this war has been depicted as good versus evil, black versus white, and it is full of nuance and grey.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's very, very easy. I mean, for me, just to kind of look at his history and where he comes from and how he was appointed and all of that, that for me is a very grey area even now. And I do question this very casual demeanour that Zelenskyy has. I like people that are running a country to also portray and project themselves as people of men of authority, and I don't feel like he has that.
But you know, the PR pressure. Look, he stayed in Kiev, which has been bombed. The First Lady's there too. He's
never there. He's always doing photo shoots around the world and attending awards.
He's getting lots of international support.
Exactly, and the success of Ukraine's defence of their own country. You talk about it being black and white, guys. If you're living in a bombed-out city, your infrastructure's being destroyed by an invader, by a so-called friendly neighbour,
which is the world's
very black and white.
The world's greatest nuclear power. Let's not forget Russia. It really is.
But also,
we have to stop this man, Putin, winning in Ukraine.
But also bear in mind that the Russians living in the east of Ukraine were being bombed by Zelenskyy for 8 years up until it took this turn for the worst. But anyway, we're clearly not going to solve this here and now today, are we?
What we were talking about, going back to the trans issue in Scotland. One of the reasons, look, we now know why Sturgeon went. It was the money, stupid, corruption on a great scale going on there, we think. But also, how did she, that clever, astute woman, get herself into a position with this trans bill where children could start at the age of 15 without telling their parents, transitioning, changing their gender?
My only view on this is everything Nicola Sturgeon has done throughout her time as leader has been about creating the end result of independence.
Yeah.
So therefore, somehow, somewhere, someone's advised her this is a good move towards that end. Personally, I think it's madness. I don't see it. I think she misread the tone of the country. My girlfriend's Scottish.
Yeah.
Admittedly, she absolutely hates her and her part.
but the evidence suggests that Scotland is the least likely to have supported a policy like that in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I want to quickly insert something which I totally agree with. So Tory MP Miriam Cates said this really, really well. She said that this is a psychological and social experiment that is being run in schools at the moment with the whole trans ideology and this sex education, and this is extremely worrying, and we need to be concerned about it.
She is one of the she's one of the brightest Tory voices in Parliament. Why she isn't a minister, although thank God she isn't, because she wouldn't be able to say all these things.
And also, just remember as well that this is an incredibly profitable industry. If you can put somebody on drugs for life as a transgender person, you are on the subscription model. It is incredibly profitable. So
I think it is important to stress that anybody that is caught up in this maelstrom of worrying about their own identity clearly requires support. What's happening is taking that support to the nth degree, which is, in my view, is completely wrong. But there has to be sympathy and understanding and support. But what is happening is just taking it to a level that I think is going to be incredibly
I'm completely with you, Johnny. It's just a joy to have you on the programme.
Yes.
I'm not going to come again.
Just because I agree with a lot of...
No, we have to agree. No, people often disagree, and that's just as much fun.
Absolutely.
We don't mind here.
Right, Bushra Sheikh, Johnny Gould, great to have you here this morning. It has flown by yet again. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This has been To The Point with Andrew and Bev. We're back tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather from the Met Office for GB News. A fine, bright day for most today with sunny spells, but it's not particularly warm out there, and there are a few heavy showers around across parts of Scotland and eastern England. We have this weather front moving across the country last night. High pressure is toppling in behind, bringing plenty of fine weather, certainly to the west. But as I said, there are a few showers around. We've seen some across Scotland and a few more breaking out now across parts of eastern England. Could be one or two heavy ones, possibly even a rumble of thunder. But much of Wales, the Midlands, southwest England, Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland staying dry and bright. And even in the east, you could easily dodge the showers and have a bit of sunshine. But it's not warm. We might squeak up to 19 degrees, but generally temperatures only in the mid-teens and feeling cooler when the showers come along. And there'll still be a few of those showers around this evening over parts of northeast England especially, but they do fade away by midnight, and then most places become dry and clear before more cloud spills into northern Scotland later on. Quite a chilly night, actually. Temperatures well down into single figures. Pockets of frost can't be completely ruled out in some sheltered parts of the countryside. So a fresh start to Tuesday for sure, but generally a fine day for England and Wales. Cloud coming into northern Scotland. It's quite a grey day here with some patchy rain trickling down towards the central belt and southern Scotland later on. Perhaps clouding over a touch in Northern Ireland, but the far north may actually brighten up. The wind's coming down from the north, so still a bit of a chilly feel. Temperatures again generally around or a touch below average Highest probably in the south, 18 or 19 Celsius. It stays fine across the south during Tuesday evening. 1 or 2 showers still across southern Scotland and northern England at this stage. But the high pressure we saw earlier is generally in control through much of this week. So bar the odd shower here and there, much of the week will be dry and bright. And slowly it will start to feel just a little bit warmer as well. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News.